What's your emergency?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the PIO Podcast, a place to discuss all public information-related topics for police, fire, EMS, and local and federal government organizations.
It was a good learning experience for a lot of us that social media is not real life.
But we have to remember the media are very rarely a target audience. They're simply that conduit.
Our words have impacts on individuals, and it may not be positive. So just being thoughtful and mindful of the words that we speak.
I think what's so interesting about this position too, and this job and this profession, is that every one of us is looking for purpose, and when we find it here, that's it.
To know is that a crisis for one is not necessarily a crisis for another.
This episode is sponsored by the Social Media Strategy Summit, the leading provider of social media education. They host annual events designed specifically for government communications professionals like you to help you build and engage your communities through social media. Visit their website at socialmediastrategiessummit.com to learn more and use promo code PIO Podcast for 10% off of your registration. Good afternoon. Today on the PIO Podcast, we have Trent Gander. Trent is a freelance writer and copywriter. Welcome to the show, Trent. Thank you for being on the show.
I'm glad to be here.
Trent, I really appreciate you coming on. You are a freelance copywriter and writer, but I want to know more about your background. So can you talk about your background, basically, talk about yourself.
Well, I had what was considered to be an odd upbringing. I was homeschooled for my entire life. I got into writing relatively early on at a high level. Then after, either just at the end of high school or just after high school, I jumped into doing a project that was essentially disaster preparedness. And after that, I went into professional copywriting full-time for the last 8 years or so, where I worked mostly with the firearms industry, law enforcement, military, stuff like that. And I had to learn the culture, the practices, and the related industries that go with it. Because there's a lot of stuff that goes into this line of work that people don't really realize that applies to just general business in life. From everything from communication, logistics, to just how we handle people.
Communication is life for a lot of people. I mean, it is that whole thing. There's so many different ways to communicate, whether it's through words, whether it's through images, body language, and then through form of communication like the news media. Yet many have difficulty communicating, let alone agreeing to disagree, which is a major factor right now. So what are your thoughts on this? What's the difficulty with people being able to communicate?
Well, I think it comes down to a number of factors. In my experiences, we default to our lowest level of training, and we don't train children how to communicate anymore. Heck, most of the people that we know as adults can barely communicate effectively, and they were never taught how to. Those who do either acquire that skill naturally or developed over years of trial and error. We used to have things like debate classes and open discourse within schools much more often than we do today, or at least how it is perceived to be done today. So if you don't know how to communicate to your own child or your family or your friends, you aren't going to be able to communicate to other people as effectively without essentially a strong base. So if you never learned how to talk to people, you're going to struggle, especially if you're in a job that requires a lot of communication. The other side of that is that we have not done the work to teach essentially a kind of sportsmanship that today it's an all or nothing world. We aren't talking about, I can respect somebody and disagree with some of their premises. Today it's you either love somebody and accept everything of them as their being, or you absolutely hate them. And this major binary world that we live in today is not conducive to actually finding solutions and producing better people, because there are things within even my close family that absolutely bug me to no end. But I still love those individuals. It's just that I don't love everything about them. And this massive push to 100% accept somebody is leading to more problems than it's worth, because I love my brother to death, but I find it absolutely annoying when he cheats. That's nothing terrible. That's not even a character flaw. It just grinds my gears to no end. And that doesn't mean that I hate him. Except when he chews.
And, it's funny. I think what scares me the most about people's lack of ability to communicate is now it's yell louder than that person until they just basically either submit or, give up and walk away. I mean, that's basically what it is now. You have protesters going into restaurants, chasing politicians, yelling at them. It's no longer a normal discourse that we could say, okay, I hear what you're saying, but you have to hear what I'm saying. And we have to say at least, okay, so you might be a little right here. I'm a little right here. Why can't we meet in the middle?
Yeah, I completely agree. And some of the best discourse I've had in the political spectrum was with someone who was a Bernie Sanders supporter. I'm not necessarily pro-Bernie Sanders. I try to be apolitical, but I'm more leaning on the right in terms of my politics. But that was the greatest conversation I ever had. I sat down with him and just had a great conversation for like 2 to 3 hours. Meanwhile, everyone else at the group was having fun. I was having a blast with this guy who was essentially on the exact opposite end of the spectrum of me politically. But there was that level of respect. He was an older gentleman and had moved and immigrated to the U.S. at the time. But the next generation, people my age and younger, didn't learn that as much, or they grew up in an environment where that mutual respect was not as emphasized. And I think that is what's lacking in a lot of communication today, is that we don't see the other person anymore. We see something. We see an enemy. We see an aggressor of some kind, rather than this is a person who has wants and needs and things that I have. The same thing. Let's see if we can find a solution that benefits all of us. It's that compromise. We live in a world where there is no compromise anymore.
Right. So you said in one of your other interviews that when it comes to life or death scenarios, we need to keep information flowing, but also manage people's reactions to it. So can you expand on this comment, explain the importance of managing reactions?
All right. So they say that fear and courage are infectious. So if someone comes onto the stage and is announcing bad news and they are distraught, they're crying, they don't have control of themselves, the idea that they portray toward the people is that they don't have control of the situation, and then people start to worry and they start to become concerned that maybe they might have to step up or things are worse than they actually appear. Excuse me. And that's why we look towards people who are calm in those situations, who maybe have better control over their voices and are not quaking in fear at the very thought of going on stage. This is an extremely important thing, is why we get things like cults of personality. People who are always calm, cool, collected. They attract people who need that solid foundation. And if you have that as like one of your spokespersons, that's an amazing tool to have, because if everyone's starting to be concerned with a situation, a nice, calm head is going to quiet everyone down, get it in control, and make things better, because if everyone's going all over the place, things are going to go bad. Going over to the life and death situations, information has to maintain a flow, because I need to get my logistical train in line. I need to know where people need to go, what stuff needs to get where, and when that needs to be done. I can't do that if the information I'm getting isn't coming in, or if I can't send information out to request information. So as long as the data, which is what needs to be done, is connected to me, or connected to people who need to know, no one's going to get what they need if that breaks down. And that's why it's absolutely important. However, there is one thing to keep in mind, that a lot of people do not know how to prioritize information. So not only do you get the important information, you get the unimportant information. A good friend of mine, I've been helping her write applications for jobs and things, and what I noticed with her is that she would continually start off a conversation with a potential client. It starts going well, and then she includes something that is unimportant to the email or to whatever pitch she's doing about herself in the first few paragraphs of the email. And it's like, that doesn't need to be there. They don't need to know that. They just need to know that you can do XYZ job. And we encounter that a lot with other people as well, because we were not taught how to prioritize information. I encounter this a lot with my immediate family. I prioritize information like 1, 2, and 3. And I always put 1 in the front, 2 in the middle, and 3 at the end. And I use that to center myself on the information I'm trying to share and cover any potential questions that someone might have. What I encounter with my immediate family is that usually put 2 or 3 in the front, and I'm still fishing around trying to figure out what conversation we're trying to have. And then eventually I get what I would put as number 1 information. And understanding how people communicate, how they decide to prioritize the information is important, because we will figure out how we can get information to them. Because information is processed at different speeds, in different ways, and different methods by different people. That's what makes us individuals. The problem is when we're dealing with a large section of the population who does not understand how we're trying to communicate to them.
Words matter in crisis communications. You have talked about word choices and tone and how they matter when trying to manage emotions and connect to the community. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So the words that we choose to describe situations kind of tell about where we are mentally and our grasp of the situation. There was a wonderful short bit I saw on Instagram about several years ago now, that was talking about how healthcare professionals deal with giving information about when someone has died and breaking that news to the family, which is actually quite interesting because in a networking call today, the person who was putting it on was trying to figure out how to break the news that their daughter's grandmother had passed. And the idea is that it is better to not necessarily sugarcoat the situation, just come right out and say that whoever has died has died. But when we're trying to get into the more finer aspects of discussion, such as dealing with lethal force situations, we tend to go away from terms like killing or dying or death because it makes people uncomfortable. There is a dangerous trap in sugarcoating things, and when we have to deal with life and death scenarios, we have to communicate in a respectful way that the situation is actually life or death. If we are making it sound not as bad as it actually is, well, yes, we can be keeping calm, but we're also not communicating the truth. If the truth is the situation looks bleak, but we have it under control, all we need to do is plans 1 through 3. Great. That instills confidence in you, in your people, and in the community around you. But if you start to tell little fibs, maybe, it really wasn't that bad, you start to degrade the trust that the people who are listening to you have placed in you. And the same thing happens in marketing. Once you destroy trust, you've destroyed it for a long time, and it takes a lot of effort to build that trust back up. So we have to manage just how much information we're letting get out. Eventually we'll let out all of it. But if we do it in the wrong way, in a disrespectful way, or in a way that will appear underhanded, we are doing much more damage by destroying the trust that the people that we're trying to communicate to have placed in us.
I'm going to go off a little bit off of the questions here because you brought this thing up about trust, and once you lose it, it takes a long time to build it up. How do you recover that trust? Because public information officers, we walk a very fine line. At times as we put information out, or we want to put information out, legal comes into play, political things come into play, and then what we're putting out it's not necessarily what it should be. It just is part of the nature of the political beast that we're involved in because we're a public service agency, a public safety agency. How do you rebuild that trust?
Let's take a quick break. I think it would be useful at least to experiment, and I know some universities have started to experiment with this, but experiment with having, a required course maybe for all students entering the university. They used to have a course at my university, which was like here's how to go to college class, here's how to study and things like that. They don't have that course anymore, but instead of having something like that, have a course that show students, here's the history of free speech, here's how it.
Well, there is the ever so underlooked option of admitting when you're wrong. In my hobbies, I like to play video games, and there have been a couple of my favorite games that have made absolutely terrible decisions in how they handle PR scandals. One decided just to knuckle down and say, hey, tough tinsel, we're doing these changes and we really don't care about you. Another one said, we recognize that this game isn't what we wanted it to be when we were first planning it. We're going to make some changes to see if we can get back to that guiding light. And you see this massive spectrum between these two. The I don't care what you think, and the listen, it's going to be uncomfortable because we want to make this game great. And I think that comes in to this situation. Admit that the information that we had at the time when we were releasing it was what we had at the time. We're now making a clarification, and it's better for you to come out and mention that, hey, we didn't have everything when we first told you. We went with what we had. And that will build trust a little bit better than trying to say, no, we had it right. This new information just wasn't up to snuff. That's, like you said, you have a very fine line. As long as you're telling the truth with the information that you have available and admit when you're wrong, it goes a long way to maintaining that trust. Because if you don't admit when you're wrong and you don't bring up that, hey, we just want to make a correction, there was some information that was unverified, or at the time we thought it was verified and it came out, and then you don't address it and somebody else finds it out, just discovers it, essentially, that will destroy trust. So if you are the first to tell people when you are wrong, if you are the first to be like, hey, we have to make a correction on some of the information that we put out there, that is going to help maintain that trust, because you're essentially telling the first story. How many times have we seen on the news and in certain situations where a story gets out, it stays that way, and then certain permutations come out, and it takes too long for a police department, a city, anything else to come out and say, hey, there's some alterations that we need to make to this, when they've already come out on social media. It's just the speed at which information travels these days is so hard to beat, especially when you have to check and actually make sure the information is accurate. And so it getting out is inevitable. That's my personal concept on a lot of secrets, or what people view as secrets, is going to get out. Secrets are always under pressure. They go to where it's easy to disseminate, which is the internet. And it just spreads like wildfire. So the faster you can get information out to people who are listening to you, the better. Because I know I like it when private businesses let me know, like, hey, something's gone wrong. Your order, it's been delayed, whether it's because you've pre-ordered something and our manufacturer has gone down or went up in smoke, or we've got screwed ourselves. As long as I'm communicated with, I trust the company. So if we think of the situation like you're running a company, you want to know what the company is doing. So be honest with what's going on. Hey, we ran into some problems. We're trying to get it done as fast as possible. We cannot snap our fingers and make everything okay.
Yeah, interesting point you bring up. So here, the biggest one I could think of this year was the Bud Light debacle, and what they did with basically not being truthful in their decision making about why they picked it, and blaming it on a marketing firm, and they didn't know what the marketing plan was. If they would have just said, hey, we screwed up, we made a mistake with our base, and we're going to fix it. If they would have just said that, they wouldn't have had I think right now it's like $20 billion in the hole.
Yeah. It's very sad that simple things like honesty is the best policy have gone out the window in the past 20 years. It's something that's so simple. So it's like, just be upfront with people. You're not going to be judged half as badly as if you tried to hide something. It's like, yeah, no, I messed up, bro. I'm sorry. I'll I'll try to make it better. You're going to trust that person or that company a lot more than someone's like, no, us? Mess something up? I'm sorry. No. You must be mistaking us for somebody else.
I flew on an airline that I probably will not fly with again several months ago. And airlines frequently will overbook flights deliberately because they know that some people won't show up. You know, they know weather gets in the way, blah, blah, blah. Well, this particular flight, it was full and they overbooked and everybody showed up. And I happened to be in the first group that there was no way I was getting bumped. But I got on the plane and a person had gotten in, I don't know, maybe group 2 or 3, sits down a couple rows behind me. Flight attendant comes up and says, sir, we're overbooked. You need to get off the plane. And I'm like, they already got on the plane. They're already in the seat. Why are you going to pick that battle at this point? And what it was is they needed to get a crew member from point A to point B. And they didn't have an open seat for that crew member. And they didn't have a spare jump seat in the plane to put the crew member. So they bumped a passenger. And that's tough. I mean, and that's unfair. But the reality of it is airlines always overbook. Always.
Now, going off of that, I think you would have a different response if they said, hey, you overbooked. We need to get a flight crew individual from point A to point B because that's their job to help make people out there right. Tongue stuff. To get him to point A to point B so he can do his job to get other people where they're going. Who wants to volunteer to give up their seat? We'll give you a little bit of extra benefits, but we need this guy somewhere else.
And that
would have been hard.
And that's usually what you have to do because he had a seat and you're now bumping him, which means that you're bound by law. I think if you bump somebody now, it's like 4 times the cost of your ticket that you're supposed to be provided. And then then of course, obviously they got to get you on a flight back to wherever you're going. But yeah, it's amazing that we just forget those simple words that we need to be honest, straightforward, and treat people with dignity in any situation, and that's going to go a long way, right?
It's very odd that a culture that embraces bribery is nicer than one that does not. Hey,
yeah,
I'm gonna give you something to maybe look the other way, or I'm going to give you something so that you'll like me, and that little bit of investment, even if it's just time, makes a difference because you just can't crack skulls all the time and get what you want long term. This is why we see in many different aspects of history that the most successful warlords or countries that took over other countries are the ones that change almost nothing about what's going on. Hey, you pay us taxes. We're now in charge. You get to do whatever you were doing before we got here. Hey, I know you don't like that group, and they don't like that group. How about we work together and we get rid of that group? That's the unfortunate side of marketing and propaganda, because they're the same thing. You have to figure out what your audience wants and what they need, what their problems are, and then you solve them. What's their motive? For your example, the person who was getting bumped on the plane. Obviously, they needed to get somewhere. If they were given a little bit, maybe a better seat, if they were given a little bit other benefits for the time that they're not going to be on that plane, it would have been a better situation. But the cracking skulls method, hey, you get out, didn't work.
Right. All right, so Trent, public information officers, we're storytellers at times, especially about our organizations and our people. Can you talk about how a PIO can develop good storytelling skills and how they can improve upon the ones that they already have?
So the first aspect is to realize that all communication is storytelling. If I tell you about what I did going to the store today, I am telling you a story. If I have a business report, I'm telling you a story. It's just really boring. An aspect to consider is the use of tabletop role-playing games and improv acting. If you can essentially come up with a story on the fly or respond to something that you weren't expecting to respond to and do that in a controlled environment, that a lot of tabletop RPGs provide, you're going to get better at storytelling, because if you don't describe things and tell people stories off the job and you're expected to do it on the job, you're going to do a lot of on-the-job learning, and that's not necessarily the best time to learn how to do something, right? We want to do it in a nice, controlled environment so that there's no judgment or consequences that are going to get us fired or reflect badly on our company or whatever we're doing. And it's just easier to go on your own time, have some fun, pretend to be somebody else with some friends, and play adult pretend with tabletop RPG. And you don't know what's going to come down the pipe. Some of the best stories I can think of involve improv acting with tabletop RPGs. And it is absolutely amazing to see someone who has maybe a little bit trouble speaking, because I have a couple of those in my regular groups that I'm in, get better at describing things and see where they need to work on how they describe things, if they describe things, how they communicate, and how they express themselves. It is a beautiful thing to see, and when you do that professionally, it's kind of on you to make sure that you can do that at the drop of a hat.
All right, so you kind of hinted at it. What are the advantages of PIOs using storytelling?
The advantages are it allows you to prioritize information better. Stories have 3 parts: a beginning, a middle, and an end. Figure out where you are with the information that you have, and then you can build out from there. This allows you to maintain some sort of flow. There's a couple other methods that you can use, such as the newspaper method, which is newspaper articles give you as much information in the shortest period of time, and then as they go down, they refine that information. Yes, it's a lot of repetition, but at least the important stuff, if someone is just skimming a newspaper, they get the important information that is accurate as quickly as possible. So with PIOs, you can give the headline, make sure it's clear, direct, and then refine that headline as you go on to make sure that whoever you're talking to, whoever's asking the questions, gets the answers, but at least everyone, before they check out, gets the gist of the story. All right? It's like reading the back page or reading the synopsis of a book. You want to make sure that there is enough information that people know what's going to happen or know what has happened, and then whether they read the book is up to them, but at least they've got the gist of it.
You know, and that's one. It's an interesting thing. I was talking with a colleague the other day about we were team working on a press release about an incident that happened, and we're like, somebody else had started writing the press release, and then the timeline was kind of out of order, and both of us that were talking about it were like, we need to fix this because it's confusing. And what's going to happen is when it's confusing is we get a lot of questions. So what I've learned over time is when you write a good press release and it's in order and it's chronological, you don't get questions because you've given them all the information in the format that their brain can understand. When people have to, like you said, 1, 2, 3, if people have to go A to D to B to C, they get confused. And they don't want that. They want the A, B, C, D. They don't want to have to jump around. So it is important to be able to have the ability to tell a good story from a press release or just on the fly when you maybe get a camera stuck in your face and somebody asks you a question. You can't just say, I'm not going to talk to you. I don't have a comment, because no comment in my field is dangerous.
Admission.
Yes.
It's admission.
Yes. All right, Trent, is there a question that I should have asked, and what would be your answer?
I don't think so, because generally when I do things like this, there's a nice free flow of conversation that covers most things that need to be covered. And I think that organic process is necessary to understand how humans communicate.
Okay, cool. All right, so we're going to go into some rapid-fire questions for you. Texting or talking?
Okay. It depends. If I have to have a bunch of very refined information, I prefer texting. If it is with somebody I know and I understand how they communicate, I will talk with them for hours.
Coffee or tea?
Absolutely coffee.
Adult drink of choice?
Southern Comfort, usually mixed with some Coca-Cola, preferably cherry.
Cool. If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
I probably go with something like remote viewing so that I can find things easily and not have to do anything with electronics.
Okay, I don't think I've heard that one before. That's awesome. Remote viewing. I like that. Do you have a pet?
Not now, but I used to have a rough and tumble outside tomcat.
Cool. Is there a book or author that's had an influence on you?
I got 2 answers for this. I chopped it down from 3. The first one obviously would be the Bible. It's very good at storytelling. The other one is a series of books by an author named H. Clay Trumbull. It covers they're referred to as the Covenant books, and it covers how ancient civilizations sealed contracts throughout the years and how some of those practices and even idioms carry on to today.
Cool. All right. Ask permission or beg for forgiveness?
This is another situational one, but usually it's easier to beg for forgiveness than to ask permission.
And if you could have coffee with any historical figure, who would you choose?
I thought a lot about this one. I'm going to have to say James Madison, because he was a larger-than-life character, but was only about 5 feet tall.
Okay. Trent, final thoughts. What key points would you like our listeners to take away from today's interview?
I would like the listeners to understand that everyone loves a good story, and if you tell a good story, that story is going to live on well beyond you, and it's going to benefit people more than you'd imagine.
Anything else you'd like to add?
Make sure that you are doing even the slightest amount of improvement is going to be better than not doing anything at all. So practice something that's going to benefit your life a little bit every day. It's better than trying to do it all at once. You can't eat an elephant in one bite. So small progressions.
Excellent. Trent, how can people best reach out to you if they want to connect or follow up?
You can find me on Facebook underneath Trent Gander, Gander. There should be a picture of me in an old army coat. You can also reach me on my email, Second Age Al-Anon, which is SECONDAGEALLANON @gmail.com. It's easier to reach me through email because I check that almost every single hour.
And I will add all of that into the show notes so it'll be easy for people to find you.
All right.
Trent, thank you very much for coming on the show. I appreciate it, and I hope you had a good time.
I had a great time.
And that's Trent Gander. Thank you. That's all for this week. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Another huge thank you to the Social Media Strategies Summit for being a sponsor of the PIO podcast. Join their First Responders Summit this April or their Government Summit this May. Learn more about confirmed speakers and programming at socialmediastrategiessummit.com and use promo code PIO Podcast for 10% off of your registration.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get notified of the latest episode. If you are listening on a platform that allows reviews, please give us a review. We appreciate any review, good or bad. It helps us improve on each episode. Until next time, be safe.